Nau mai hoki mai ki tamaki mā koutou, me tēnā koutou te whānau o tautahi. Welcome back everybody, welcome back to Auckland, and thanks so much to our whānau, our family in Christchurch. Again, this is just going to be a nice quick changeover. I'm just going to introduce you to Huia, Amber and Molly, who are going to speak about their mahi, working with rangatahi in Aotearoa, so with the youth arts. I'll leave it at that, and I'd like to introduce you to Huia. Tēnā koe, he hoa.
Tēnā koe. O tēnā tātou katoa ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Huia O'Sullivan Takuingwa. As Borni introduced me, my name's Huia O'Sullivan. I run a small charitable trust in South Auckland called Ngā Rangatahi Toa. Ngā Rangatahi Toa loosely translates to the group of young warriors. We've been around for over 10 years now, and what we do is we use creativity as the vehicle to be able to re-engage young people back into mainstream education and or employment. The reason we exist is because we've identified that there is a big gap within our education system that doesn't meet the needs of our young people that are right on the peripheral. So what we do is we build their coping strategies and protective factors to build resilience so that they can go out into life and they can flourish. We serve young people specifically in South Auckland between the ages of about 13 to 18. They can stay on our program for about 3 years. They stay with us and we have a whole setting. I'll be sharing with you a video that we created last year, and that was in the 100-day window that we had between a level 4 lockdown and a level 3. What we noticed with our young people was when we went into a level 4, which was meaning complete isolation, was that our young people were starting to, things weren't going well in the home. There was overcrowding, families were struggling, people were back in the home that shouldn't have been there, and it was creating chaos for our young people. We'd gone straight online with a lot of our social media platforms to re-engage and ensure that our young people still felt connected. What we saw in this 100-day window was the opportunity to really be able to teach and share with our young people the ability that even though there's chaos, we can create stability for them, and that's what we've done through the arts. So the video is a reflection of a legacy piece that we created, and that piece was our Haka. What that has meant is that our young people, even though we've been in existence for 10 years, we've never had our own Haka. For many of you that watch the All Blacks will probably think that this is the war cry, but for us it's actually a process that we go to. Tikanga Māori is what connects and anchors our young people to knowing who they are, because so many of them that are brought up in South Auckland are very disconnected from their own iwi or their tribal area. So we use Tikanga Māori or Te Ao Māori, the world of Māori, to use as an anchor point. We engage with creative artists, teaching artists and kaiako facilitators where our young people can see themselves, so that if the creative arts is something that they want to move into as a career pathway, this is already role modeled through osmosis to them. One of the big key things that we do is we focus on the strengths of our babies. So we look at what they're good at that maybe isn't really uplifted in a classroom, such as tagging on a desk to go, bro, you're a graffiti artist. We're going to find you an artist that's going to work with you, and we're going to create murals around Tāmaki Makaurau, around Auckland. So we look at the strengths, and you'll see this start to come through the video that we're going to share. And what we do through our process or our kaupapa is we create microcosms, and this allows and enables safe space for our young people to be authentic, to be vulnerable, and to walk in their power. And we believe all our young people have a very, very big power and a big strength. We use the Haka, which is talked about hikuiku te uira, and it talks about the lightning bolts, which is how we refer to our young people. So what I want to do with you now is hand it over to our babies to share with you their experience of Haka and what we created in a 100-day window. Ngā mihi.
There's a key concept in this Haka, which is a reference from an East Coast Haka, hiko hiko te wira, and that's a reference to lightning during a big storm. So even though the storm could be a pretty dangerous and dark storm, within the storm there's little light bulbs of strength, and we liken the young ones to to the lightning bolts. So over the last 2-3 years, Ngā Rangatahi Toa have slowly started implementing more and more tikanga Māori and kaua Māori I roto I wa rātou wānanga. And I suppose the Māoriness and that connection to the earth and the sky has really been able to strengthen the identity of a lot of the rangatahi of this program. So now it's time to elevate that a little bit more and come out of COVID-19 with a blast just like lightning and have these kids compose their own haka. So the haka wānanga, it's about bringing them onto this marae here. This is Te Mānuka Nuka o Hoturoa, and the wharenui behind me is Kahu Pāke. Haka is about bringing people together. Haka is about connection to the earth. Haka is about connection to the sky. What we want to do is use this 2-day wānanga to help these kids learn their connection to earth, the horizon, and also to the sky, and all the different atua that they're all related to. Get them to set their own goals, and we will work to their own goals. Have them create the concept based on, most importantly, their own background, and then what it means for them to come together. All of their concepts will be brought forth. They'll come up with words, and then if they don't know the Māori terms, then we'll help translate those words for them. And then more importantly is having those words linked into the actions. The other thing about haka is a lot of people don't think that it can be an enjoyable experience because they only think of the angry side of haka and war. But haka is one of the funniest things that you can be involved with, especially when people make mistakes. So it's a really good opportunity to, one, be vulnerable, make mistakes and gain strength out of making those mistakes, and share a laugh with one another in a comfortable environment. These kids have their own individual strength and we don't want to lose that. And so that's the power of engaging in haka in a comfortable environment like we have here. Performing in unison but looking like an individual at the same time.
Focus, strength, they stand out to me because we had all of that, like all of us, we had strength and focus to make the haka.
Hiko hiko te wira, the lightning, and ruana te whenua, the rumble of the ground, our legacy and unity. Together we can make something that will better ourselves, and maybe the next generation might love it.
As an organisation, I felt intuitively that we're ready to be able to, for our rangatahi to compose our haka. COVID saw us all needing to pivot, adapt and be agile, which for me is the very essence of haka. We've come to a stage too, I think, where the kaiako, our creative artists and facilitators that we've had on this journey for the last 3 years too, have been really imperative and significant to the mahi that we are doing with our rangatahi. So it felt too that we had the right people in place to be able to do that alongside our rangatahi and to be able to ensure that our tikanga and our mātauranga Māori is held safely. Instead of creating a rap or a movement piece or a theatre piece, the vehicle's now haka. And so what was coming out was them standing in their light, them being authentic and being truthful and being able to speak their truth. That's what this journey and this whole wānanga was about, was taking them on a journey to create that particular haka, which I felt at the end of it they were able to own and be in that haka. And that is rangatiratanga, that is them owning their space, standing in their light and standing proud of who they are.
The best way we can do it is probably from the heart, always finding that purpose to push yourself further to do better.
I will take this haka back with me and I will keep it in my heart forever.
Aha, Tēnā koutou. Ko Amber Walls tōku ingoa. Hi everybody, I'm Amber Walls. I have the most brilliant job working in the youth empowerment team in Auckland Council, and I've also been, for the last few years, doing a PhD at the University of Auckland, exploring the potential of the arts to enhance youth wellbeing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And today, I'm just going to share some of the insights from that research. So my research looks broadly at the practice and policy landscape, both locally and internationally. And I also worked with an organisation to co-design a practice framework with young people, arts, health, education and youth practitioners. And it's not a prescriptive framework, but a set of practices and principles that we collectively believe are critical to effective youth arts wellbeing projects. And so, although this practice framework is really contextually and culturally grounded, the insights are relevant internationally, and I'm just going to share those with you today and reflect on some issues of power along the way. So why do we need to do this research? Well, first of all, we urgently need to rethink our approaches to youth mental health. Apart from the really awful statistics around youth mental health locally and globally, our current approaches don't serve young people well. They're dominated by medical models, psychologized approaches that seek to create behavior-changing individuals rather than consider the life environments that those young people live in. They also frame young people in deficit ways in terms of their problems, what they're lacking, as developmentally incomplete and in need of repair. And this is despite the fact that we know that young people thrive in healthy life environments and that their well-being is impacted by those social contexts that are quite often really beyond their control. So, at the heart of my research, sorry, I'm skipping slides. There we go. So, at the heart of my research is a commitment to listen really carefully to young people, and especially the voices of those who are overrepresented and unheard in the mental health system. And here in Aotearoa, this includes Māori, Pacifica, migrant, rainbow, and other young people with marginalised identities. And our mental health system has always really privileged Eurocentric mindset, so that's another kind of problem. And today we've kind of looked at some of the really beautiful indigenous, Pacific, holistic, relational, collective understandings of well-being and different ways of knowing the world. And these are the kind of voices that I was hoping to listen to in my research. And not surprisingly, young people describe mental health services in Auckland as alienating, stigmatising, inaccessible, culturally inappropriate and unhelpful. Okay. So the arts have massive potential to offer inclusive, culturally attuned approaches that position young people in really strength-based ways, and Huia's work just spoke to that really. But this doesn't always happen in practice. The arts youth wellbeing field is complex. There's lots of things that get in the way, and Molly in the next presentation is going to speak to quite a lot of those issues. But here I just wanted to focus on this kind of question of how the arts contribute to youth wellbeing. So it's been recognised that because there's been such pressure to evidence the impacts of the arts, there's lots of kind of literature about what outcomes are achieved and not much that describes like how do we actually achieve those outcomes? What does good practice look like? So my research directly addresses this challenge, and I'm looking at what is it uniquely about the arts that promote well-being in ways that are meaningful to young people. So my work focuses around this case study, calling it Project X, it's anonymous. It was a new multi-art project for 13 to 24-year-olds experiencing really significant mental health challenges, so things like anxiety, depression, and psychosis. It's run by a small arts and health charity, so it's quite typical of the organisations who do this kind of work. And we used a series of participatory workshops to involve the young people in the project, Project X staff and their partner organisations, so that's arts, health, education and youth providers, in constructing a shared theory of change. So a theory of change is a theory about how the project works to achieve change, like how all the different elements come together to result in the change that we hope to see. And our shared theory of change sets out to rebalance power dynamics, acknowledging that particular perspectives have been privileged today, as I've just kind of mentioned, and that often those are funders and scientific evidence and kind of Eurocentric perspectives, not young people's, and mostly not arts organisations. And then alongside this kind of workshop process, I also carried out a really extensive review of the international literature from across the arts, youth, health and education fields to check our project theory against existing research and evidence. So we created a theory of research that was really grounded in all sorts of different kinds of expertise and evidence. Okay, this is quite a busy slide. It's a bit of an overview of the research process. We did one workshop with the practitioners. We did 2 workshops with young people who had attended at least one term of Project X. We asked these questions in the bottom left-hand corner there, really looking at why is the project needed, what would you hope to get out of the project, and what do we think are the kind of really critical things that make it work in the way that we want it to work. And then we also did this really brilliant exercise in the right-hand corner there. We did some ecosystem mapping, and we mapped the kind of causes of poor mental health and the project activities against this ecological systems framework, which is kind of based on Bronfenbrenner's framework. It's used really often in the youth sector. And it's a really, really valuable way of understanding human development as part of an ecological system with young people at the centre of a really complex set of relationships and settings. And we use this to really help us understand what was the potential scope and the kind of limitations of the project. So if we're just working with young people at the centre there, it's unlikely, for example, that we're going to impact on practices and policies impacting wellbeing in those outer rings. So first practitioner workshop was fairly regular, kind of flip chart, sticky notes, lots of group exercises. And then the 2 youth workshops, we used arts-based methods and we got lots of really rich data. In the first one, we used paint and collage to create images in response to those research questions. And the group created abstract and metaphorical images to represent ideas. You can see some of those on the right. And one of the young person used a tree to represent healthy growth. So for the second workshop, we used the tree as a basis of the workshop, as a metaphor for kind of well-being. And we made a giant tree, and the root system represented the things that fed the tree, and the fruits and leaves represented the outcomes, the things that we'd like to grow. So the group created drawings, collages, or used words to represent ideas, creating things like fruit, flowers, worms. And then they added kind of gremlins and clouds and watering cans representing other aspects of the tree's ecology. So all the things that might help the project to work on it or might support well-being. And those are the things that I'm going to kind of look at in a few minutes. So then the next thing was I synthesized all of that together and looked at the literature review alongside that, and actually found that our theory was aligned with a really rich body of literature from really diverse interdisciplinary sources. So I'm just going to talk through critical practice and principles now. And first of all, the participants described how Project X creates a breathing space, a safe refuge from pressure and stress, a micro-community with its own way of being and being together. And this is really nicely represented in this image of a gremlin as a shitty adult rule eating all young people's soul joy. So a really critical ingredient at the heart of this kind of refuge, this space, were playful, open-ended, creative processes with no fixed end, creating a space for experimentation, languages for self-expression, and no right or wrong answers. And young people talked about how their worlds were so rule-laden and prescriptive that this was a really powerful antidote and a really rare moment of freedom. Another critical ingredient was space for critical reflection, and this kind of opportunity for really kind of stress-free art making and purposeful reflective activities which enabled relaxation, mindfulness, flow, space to disrupt and and reframe stuck on negative thought patterns and think about life in different ways. And again, this was a rare space in young people's life to do this. They also talk about how playful creativity fueled their spirits and activated their imaginations. They felt soul joy, optimism for the future, and new possibilities were imagined. And it was a space where you could have fun not getting high and look for all of the colours of the rainbow, not just the grey. Another important thing was about the importance of rehearsing the revolution, they described, growing coping strategies, strengths and resources for navigating these really tricky life pathways. And central to this were really important processes of experiential learning, taking risks, problem solving together, practicing strategies in a safe space, and the power of the imagination to imagine different possibilities. And again, these processes weren't replicated for a lot of the other young people in other parts of their life. And as someone who's worked in youth arts, none of these findings surprise me, and people have talked about them lots today. But they're things that never appear in our sort of project plans or our outcome frameworks, like things like soul joy, breathing space and imagination. So those are kind of big questions for us to think about. So young people also talked about how relationships established in the project enabled belonging and participation with power. They felt listened to, valued, validated and genuinely cared for. And central to this was ako, a Māori concept meaning reciprocal learning, a process in which we're all teacher and all learner. This principle is absolutely central to participatory arts, which are founded on collaboration, co-learning and shared problem solving. So that presents significant potential to collapse the kind of power dynamics that play out in the mental health system and position young people in strength-based ways. And for young people, the experience of being an artist or a collaborator, not a patient, was really powerful. This image here looks quite kind of bonkers. And it's based on a story told by a participant about how he never felt good enough at school because he wasn't one of the elite athletes who got to wear a special jacket to publicly affirm their elite status. And the young people in the group agreed that Project X was a place where everyone got to wear a special jacket. And on that image also is the word mana. So mana is a Māori concept which means inherent status and value. And upholding someone's mana is about validation, and it's absolutely crucial to well-being. So young people felt their mana was upheld by processes such as shared decision-making and careful inclusion of practices specific to all identities, such as tikanga Māori, Māori cultural practices, eating together, use of self-elected gender pronouns for our rainbow youth, and a prayer room for our Muslim young people. So finally, I don't have time to cover all of the critical ingredients, but I'd just like to acknowledge and highlight that youth arts is a really highly relational practice. It's about building relationships. And at the heart of this is the expert but really human project facilitator, simultaneously an artist, a navigator, an educator, and an architect curating a caring, attuned practice environment. So, as I said, there's kind of heaps of evidence and research backing all of this up, and bringing it together paints this really rich picture. I don't have time to talk through it today, but I've put this slide together, and I've put that information on the Padlet, on the conference platform, with this kind of summary of some really useful things that speak to the ideas I've been talking about. And then just finally, I'm just going to give you a sneak peek of our emerging Project X theory of change. So this is bringing all of those kind of visuals, those ideas together into a picture of the project as an ecology supporting youth well-being. So we've kept the tree metaphor, we've got the critical practices and processes used by Project X in the tree roots feeding the tree, with the leaves representing those seemingly small but impactful gains like showing up on time, making a friend, giving something a go, and having fun not getting high. And then the bigger sort of blossoms, the longer term outcomes, are those kind of things I've been kind of talking about on the trees at the top, represented in the brilliant images from the workshops. And I've framed the outcomes as possibilities because they're by no means certain or fixed, and certainly shouldn't be expected. So this is my final slide. And drawing the presentation to a close, I just wanted to highlight a key message that is that the project's obviously brilliant and can support young people's well-being in all sorts of ways, but clearly those toxic environments that young people describe are where our attention should be lying, and that they need fixing more than young people. So I offer a departing quote from the brilliant Chrissy Tiller, who urges us to consider how we might take on such bold challenges in our work. She says, "We can no longer ignore the fierce and urgent questions facing our world. I'm not advocating for, not the kind of arts practice that brings about neat solutions such as social inclusion, consensus or cohesion, but art that is brave enough to challenge inequity, promote social justice and create space where dissonance and rebellious transformation are actively encouraged." Kia ora. That's the end of my presentation. I'm now going to pass you on to Molly.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Molly Mullen, Takuingwa. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland in the Faculty of Education and Social Work. It's a real privilege to follow on from Huia and Amber talking about their amazing practice and research. I'm going to be talking to some slides, which will come up. Thank you. I'm going to be presenting on two research projects that I've been working on for the past 3 or 4 years now. They're two separate projects that are looking at the context of arts for youth wellbeing in Tāmaki Makaurau, so in the Auckland region. And we've brought these two projects together in a paper that's been co-authored by myself with Amber, Maria Ahmad, who worked on the project as well, and Professor Peter O'Connor. So I'm presenting on behalf of our group today. Okay, there we go. So this research was not about generating more evidence for how the arts can contribute to youth wellbeing. Instead, the research was around understanding the needs and the aspirations of the youth arts sector so as to inform the funding and the policy context for that practice. The research came about actually through the formation of Te Ora-Oaha, which has already been talked about earlier in the sessions. But through that grassroots consultation process, it became really clear that the sector felt unsupported, fragmented, under-resourced, and there was a perception that there was a lack of policy and funding support, or that the policy and funding supports that were there were not necessarily encouraging, sustainable practice. But 2017, when Te Ora-Oaha was forming, was also a year of change in the policy environment, with the election of the Ardern-led Labour government. And so this was, as Minister Sepuloni mentioned, a point at which government turned to well-being at the heart of government decision-making and the heart of budget. And this was quite significant. And the government was also recognising publicly the relationship between the arts and well-being, which had been almost unheard of for the previous 2 decades. And we've seen over the past few years the mainstream arts funding from Creative New Zealand realigning with community-based youth arts and wellbeing focused practices. And similarly, we've seen the Local Authorities Act have an amendment to reinstate local authorities' commitment to supporting wellbeing, including cultural wellbeing. And so these are really significant changes. So at this moment of change, we wanted to make sure that the voices and experiences of the sector were being taken into account. And so we've heard about the amazing practice that's taking place, but I find myself always talking about funding. And the reason why is because what I've learned through both my practice and my research is that getting the funding right is really important. It matters. And we know this from the literature in arts, health and wellbeing. Here in Aotearoa, Bidwell, in her extensive literature review, highlights the limitations of short-term funding and how this can actually undermine the wellbeing of very vulnerable young people involved in arts projects if those projects are unstable or staff can't be properly retained and to gain experience and trust with those young people. This issue also comes up in the Be Creative, Be Well report from the Arts Council in England, which suggests that time-limited funding undermines the long-term relationships that are core to successful arts and wellbeing projects in the community. Other research highlights the ways that funders can inadvertently influence the approaches that are taken by organisations. For example, if evaluation and reporting calls on organisations to present evidence of individual impacts, organisations tend to emphasise that individual change in their work, even when, as Amber has so importantly highlighted, it's the environmental, systemic, structural changes that will make the most difference. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. There isn't really an agreed on definition for youth arts in Aotearoa, but so for the two research projects that I'm talking about, we had a working definition which really reflects the practice Amber and Huia have shared. But the things that are key in terms of the findings from this study is that these are complex practices and specialist practices that combine both artistic exploration and youth work or social work, both values and outcomes. There's a dual emphasis on a careful, inclusive process and crafted outcomes, even if those outcomes aren't shared publicly. And there's a dual focus on the creative and personal development of the youth. And it's this complexity, this duality of the practice that makes it quite difficult to fund. So I'm talking about two projects. Study one was a survey research that involved 19 youth arts organisations from Tāmaki Makaurau completing a questionnaire. The questionnaire asked them about their practice. It asked them about their understanding of wellbeing, their understanding of what they were doing, as well as the challenges and aspirations that they had in their day-to-day work. So we had a wide range of organisations who responded to that, which gave us a really rich body of qualitative and quantitative data at the end. Study two was quite a different methodology. It was an ethnographic study. We worked with 3 organisations really closely over 8 months, carrying out weekly observations with them, interviewing people within the organisations repeatedly, and doing group interviews with people who supported the organisation, as well as with the young artists. And that was really focused on those 3 organisations' distinct experiences of the funding and policy landscape, looking at what was working, what was not working, and so what could be changed. This is just a breakdown of the participants from Study 1. I'm showing this because I think it gives a sense of the diversity of the different kinds of organisations and practices that were included. And then I want to briefly introduce the participants from Study 2. They've consented to be named in the research. They were really partners on the journey and learning alongside us. So, Crescendo. Crescendo provides programs for young people that nurtures and empowers and gives them lifelong skills. And they do this through mentoring, personal development, and training in music and the creative industries. The image here was created by one of the young artists in the focus group to represent what Crescendo meant to her. And this statement kind of summarizes the value that the young people and the meaning that they found in working as part of Crescendo. The second organisation is the Black Friars, a pan-Polynesian theatre company, a multi-generational collective working on all possible fronts to decolonise society and challenge the systems, institutions and ideologies that hold down and misrepresent Polynesian peoples in Aotearoa. And again, the image created by one of their young artists to show what the Black Friars looks like to her, and a summary of some of the statements that the young people made about what being part of the Black Friars meant to them. And finally, Mapura Studios, a creative space in central Auckland that runs specialist visual arts and multi-arts classes and projects for both young people and adults, but who also work on all fronts to challenge exclusion and ableism that impact on the lives of their artists. And once again, a kind of representation of the organisation by the young artists, and some statements that show what they mean to the young artists and their communities. So what did we find by bringing together the data from these 2 projects? Well, I'm not going to labour on this slide because you've heard this from Amber and Huia. We have a really rich, strong practice base here in Aotearoa. Some of the distinct features that we found is a kind of hybridity of practice, bringing together different forms of creative and cultural expression, bringing together different disciplines and professions. The practice context is overwhelmingly strengths-based and about supporting young people's self-determination. It's focused on the value of self and cultural expression, and also of facilitating connection to self, to others, to whānau, to community. But this practice is proceeding with a very conscious awareness of the impact of systemic and social barriers on youth wellbeing. What we found through the survey study was that funding was the main challenge identified by the youth arts organisations that took part, but there were specific aspects of the funding system that were getting in the way of sustainable, rich, culturally intelligent practice. So the first issue is scarcity. So this is to do with, there was a perception that there was a limitation of funding overall, but also that it was particularly difficult to fund practice that brought together both arts and wellbeing. Participants reported an intense competition for a small pool of funding, both in terms of arts funding and philanthropic funding. Some participants speculated that the problem was not the scarcity of funding, but actually their capability as fundraisers. But through doing a kind of review of the policy and funding context, we're able to see that it would be incredibly difficult to fund the specialist area of the arts, because so few funders recognise that integral interrelationship between arts and wellbeing and practice. This area of the arts is not really explicitly recognised by many funders in Aotearoa. So it's harder to communicate what it is. The second issue is that the funding that is there tends to be short-term project-based funding. And this is a challenge when the complex factors that impact on youth wellbeing often require long-term, sustained, and also responsive, emergent practice. Having short-term funding gets in the way of this kind of work. It means that organisations are often having to support an ongoing programme with a patchwork of small, short-term grants, and having to attend to lots of different objectives and outcomes and reporting needs all the time. It means it's difficult to recover the full cost of delivery of projects, and it's very difficult to work in a way that's youth-centred if you're always having to attend to outcomes that you've agreed for small grants that are continuously coming to a close. And it's difficult to invest in long-term staff development, and the precarious nature of work in this field is an issue that came up. The final challenge is probably the most difficult one to explain, but it's the way that organisations experience the need to represent their work and the young people that they work with in particular ways to be able to get the funding, to meet the funding criteria. And largely this meant putting a deficit frame around the young people, even though that was not the approach that was taken within the organisation otherwise. But they needed to represent the young people as being in need, as being vulnerable, as being disadvantaged, able to justify why they would be given the funding, but this conflicted with the strengths-based approach that they had. Some of the organisations also really were conflicted about the box ticking that was required by funding, which felt like they were re-labelling, re-stereotyping these young people, these particular groups of youth, particularly young Pacifica people and disabled young people. And they felt that the data they were required to provide for accountability or evaluation did not always capture the real value and meaning of the practice, what it meant to the young people and to the communities that those young people belonged to. There was a whole host of other challenges that came up from different parts of the study, including a lack of affordable, accessible, appropriate spaces, which can be a real drain on resources. And also the high administrative burden of funding, which takes resource, time, energy away from developing the practice itself. But there were some things that were working. What came across really strongly was that when there was a quality relationship with a funder, it made a huge difference. When funders took the time to come out and see the work, to meet face-to-face, to go on a journey with the organisations, then really amazing things could happen. Intersector partnerships could also be really fruitful where there was a mutual benefit through exchanging resources. So our conclusion is that we do need to change some things in the funding and policy context to really ensure all rangatahi, all youth in Aotearoa have stable, sustainable access to participatory arts to be able to express themselves creatively in a way that's relevant to their lives and cultures. So what we're recommending is that given the overall policy turn to wellbeing, we could have a collaborative cross-sector fund for arts and youth wellbeing. In line with recommendations from the funding sector itself, we'd like to see more long-term funding and alternatives to contestable grants. We'd like to see more funders investing in the core mission of organisations rather than in projects. We would like to see funders promoting equitable cultural wellbeing by developing models that respond to the cultural practices and aspirations and sovereignty of indigenous communities. And we think that funders can commit to providing full funding for salaries and also to addressing salary and pay parity in this sector. And finally, we would like more opportunities like this for practitioners, policymakers, researchers to come together and share their knowledge and evidence. Okay, I'm going to finish, we're going to come back to questions. I'm just going to show a really brief video which includes some of the participants from the research summarising our key messages.
Dancing, music, acting, painting.
Ngā Toi, the arts of Moana, Oceania, Pacifica.
It's important. It's not just the young people, it's everyone involved. Their friends, their whānau, their communities.
It makes me proud of who I am and where I'm from.
Countless studies now show the difference that participating in the arts can make.
It makes me feel like I can make a difference and that what I think and feel matters.
It can create real social change.
I find where I belong.
Working towards a common goal.
Belonging to something bigger than myself.
It's my whānau, my ainga, my village, my home.
For those that fall through the cracks.
At school, in our communities.
It gives people another path.
We have some incredible artists that are being recognised all over the world.
There's nothing I would rather do than work with these young people.
But to give rangatahi the best support we can, we need the right support. We need the right resources.
But the funding just isn't there.
Much of my time is spent on grant applications. Like, the work is with the young people, not in writing application after application.
We are good at fundraising, but it is exhausting scrambling around.
It kind of makes us competitive with each other.
We should be sharing our knowledge and helping each other, rather than spending our time and resources looking for money.
And when the funding doesn't come through, it makes things really tough.
It's like we fall into a grey area where we're not quite a charity, but we're also not individual artists.
It's about creating change, but it's not about using the arts to change young people because someone else decides there's something wrong with them. It's about young people making art to create change for themselves, for their communities, for society. So it is always about the arts, but it's also always about more than the art.
It's hard to keep it all going, but we have to.
Because it's important.
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 Kia ora no. Oh, that was amazing. That video was really impactful, both of them. So clearly I've popped back in to say hi. Kia ora. We've got about 5 minutes left and we're just going to do a few questions. If anyone has any, get them in quickly so we can push them into the 5 minutes. Molly, I'm going to start with you, if that's all right. We've got a question here that says, Molly, could you tell us more about what good practice funding models for arts and wellbeing initiatives look like?
Yeah, so I've been doing some work on this with the Taumata Toi-a-Iwi, with some partners here in Auckland over the past year, working with funders, working with people in that policy space, to look at what other possibilities there are. And we're really just scratching the surface, but I think looking at participatory models of resourcing, there's a really fantastic report that's come out from, I think, grant makers from the arts in the States, which looks at how can we fund for solidarity, not charity. And I think that could be something that we could think about what that would mean here as well. So trying to remove that charitable model of giving and think about what different kinds of relationships can we form. And I think, as I said in the presentation, to think about how can we invest long term and invest to be able to go on a journey and accept that things are going to fail, but that we can overcome those by funders and organisations working together for a common goal.
Right, that's amazing. Embracing that failure, it's quite an interesting concept, right? To be able to fail so that you can learn from it.
Yeah.
I've got the next question, Huia, is for you. This is an interesting one. What's the first thing you'd change in these young people's worlds to help them better thrive?
Funny how we think we need to change a young person. Because for me, and going back to Molly's kōrero talking about self-determination, and we refer to that as rangatiratanga, so the young person always determining their journey. So for us, it's not for me to determine what I would ever change or even think about wanting to change about the young person. More so, it's looking at what we would change about the system and the environment that they are often put into, and I think about this within our education system, what we would change within our education system to be able to support creativity and wellbeing within the schools as a given. You know, that doesn't change from depending on what postcode that you're from, but they have the same equal access to creativity regardless of where they are. And I mean, this is just within Tāmaki Makaurau and these other parts of Aotearoa, you know, our regional whānau that are out there that are doing it really hard and that are a lot more isolated, and yet we sit within a city and these massive disparities that happen across our region around access for our young people to the arts given that the postcode. So for me, it wouldn't be about changing our young people. Our young people are fine just as they are. Or my job is to wrap tools around them so that they can thrive and flourish as they become young adults. It's looking at the system in which they live in to go, how can we look at flipping that on its head and recreating and redefining what that looks like. And I think a lot of that goes back to your kōrero, Molly, around funding, funding models, competitive funding, the constant hustle of looking for money, and the constant hustle of and writing reports when we're not all craftsmen. But we're out here, you know, we have the experience and the skills and the depth of knowledge to be able to work in really relational practice to those young people.
Oh, kia ora. Pai ana. I actually have a question myself. So your mahi is in Tāmaki Makaurau at the moment, but you're from Whakatāne?
Well, I'm Taranaki so Tiatiawa ki Taranaki, but I was raised in Whakatāne. You know, growing up in Whakatāne, we have one of the highest youth suicide rates in the country and in developed worlds. And I think for me, part of why I'm where I am is because I actually have a purpose now, and that's to be able to look at how we shift that youth suicide rate. That's one of our strategic objectives, is how we do that, and we do it through creativity. So it's about ensuring that we're shifting that trajectory for our young people. So we're focusing on wellbeing, we're focusing on the protective factors that keep them safe. So when they get to that crossroads in their life, it's a given that they will always choose the positive pathways because that's what they're wrapped in. Creativity enables and gives us the vehicle for them to explore that. Maybe their language isn't a written one, but it's a physical language. It comes through dance or it comes through movement. And that we're in those, when they're in the crossroads of depression or anxiety, that they have the tools internally to be able to look at self, practice mindfulness, practice breath work, pull on their culture and use that as their strength and their tools.
Tēnā tāhua, kia ora e hoa. Kia ora. I think we've got time for one more question. One more question, everybody. This is for you, Amber. What do you think are going to be the main outcomes of your research?
Well, I'd like a PhD. I'm looking at Molly because she's my supervisor. I hope to finish it one day. It's been a long journey. I guess what I'm really aware of is that the kind of value of it really is drawing together different bits of knowledge and information. It's not necessarily finding completely new stuff, but it's doing it from young people's perspective. So young people are kind of first and foremost at the centre. And then it's drawing in the kind of evidence and research around that, and a really, really diverse body of research that's not really been brought together. So that in itself is a really useful thing that I hope to share with other people. Hopefully they can use that in their work to help make the case for some of their work, make the case to funders. People like to see that kind of evidence. But also, like, it's really obvious that there are some really common critical practices and principles, ideas that are really at the heart of this work. And so I would like to share our practice framework, our theory of change, with wider groups of organisations, and look at, is there a shared practice framework? Is there something we can do around this? So, for example, in the project that was my case study project, we used the theory of change to train new artists coming in. So it might be that it's used in that way as a framework to understand if this is what good practice looks like, what do we need in place? You know, what training do we need? What ideas do we need? What mindsets do we need to work with? So yeah, so I'm hoping it's useful to other people and I can share it. But mostly I just want to finish it.
Tēnā tāhua, that's amazing. What a beautiful koha to be able to gift out. Like, that's a lot of mahi, a lot of work, and it's a beautiful gift to be able to give to our rangatahi. Kia ora. Thank you for your work. Well, I'm pretty sure that's about the amount of time that we have. Before we wrap up, I just had a kōrero with my friends over here, and one of the things that I didn't mention was, now that we, what I didn't mention was how I tie into all of this mahi. Now that all of the main kaupapa has finished, I think now's the time just to let you understand a bit of my whakapapa. So I am one of the founding members, along with Amber and Molly, for Te Ora Auaha. There was a big group of us. So I've been on this hikoi, this journey, for some years now. And so I'm lucky enough to be a part of the network and understanding how hauora, how our wellness across our country is working, so that we're able to unite together to figure out what we can do to uplift and make sure that we have activation and innovation within the spaces that allows us to be a part of this world of hauora. I also have my own company called Taurima Vibes Limited. I'll put the limited on there, it sounds really flash then. Taurima Vibes, we are in service to those within our arts community who feel that their voices are underrepresented, their faces are underrepresented, and we look to uplift and uphold the integrity of our Māori tangata whenua within all of those systems across our arts community, as well as those who feel like they are, as I said, unheard, unseen, and marginalised. It's an amazing journey to be able to be a part of this type of kaupapa and this type of mahi. So I feel very gifted, as in, well, I feel like I've been given a great gift to be sitting alongside these amazing wahine toa today, and I think that's enough about me. But before we finish, I'm going to just do a few thank yous, because today wouldn't happen without some of our whānau that's been around. So Esther, who's been looking after us, has had to leave because of some sick children. So kia ora, Esther. I want to thank our team who are here today, who have looked after us. So that's Erin behind the camera. Kia ora, Erin. And there's Connor and Edward over in the corner there. Te Taumata Toi-a-Iwi, our whānau there. Our whānau in Ōtautahi, kia ora for your mahi today and for being a part of it. And it would be remiss of me to not remember the beautiful way that we started today with Enon and Ricky. Thank you all for tuning in. And I'm really glad for you that you got to understand the mahi that we do here in Aotearoa, that you got to witness some of the beauty that is the world of Māori, te ao Māori. So kia ora. We're going to do just a very quick karakia before we close, and that's us for today. So you can go to bed and we'll go to work. just we had a kōrero around what kind of karakia we would be doing. And I think I've rested on the idea that this one is around the beginnings. This is a karakia tīmatanga, because this is the beginning of a connection we have with you out there. I laid that wero, or I gave you that gift earlier to be able to do your own research, find out more about who we are and what we're able to offer, and all of the mahi that's been going on here. So, that being said, me noi tātou. Whitiora, whitiora. Whitiora ki te whai ao ki te ao marama. Whiti ki runga, whiti ki raro. E ngungu ki te whānau, e ngungu ki te whare. Tītaha ki tēnei taha, tītaha ki tērā taha. Tī hei, mauri ora. Kia ora. Ara. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ka kite.